The perfect life that wasn't. Emily Dawson always believed in fairy tales. Not the kind with castles and dragons, but the kind with warm homes, loving marriages, and children playing in the backyard. From a young age, she envisioned her life with a devoted husband, a family built on love, and a future full of laughter. She believed in happy endings, and when she met Andrew Dawson at 23, she was convinced she had found hers. Andrew was everything she had hoped for: charming, intelligent, and driven. He had a strong jawline, a confident smile, and a laugh that could light up the dullest of days. When he looked at her, Emily felt like the most beautiful woman in the world. They met at a mutual friend's wedding, and from the moment he asked her to dance, they had been inseparable. By 25, she walked down the aisle, her heart pounding with joy. As she stood before him, reciting her vows, she felt invincible, certain that nothing could ever shatter the love they shared. The world was bright, their future promising, but reality had a way of twisting even the best of dreams. The cracks began to show. For the first 2 years of their marriage, life was good. They moved into a cozy 2-bedroom home in the suburbs, built routines of Sunday morning pancakes and Friday movie nights, and spent their weekends dreaming about their future. They spoke of children, of road trips across the country, of growing old together. But then the months passed, then years, and the pregnancy tests remained negative. Emily tried to stay positive. At first, she laughed it off, telling herself that some things took time. But with each passing month, her hope dimmed. They visited doctors, tried different treatments, changed their diets, and even looked into holistic therapies. Yet every time she held a pregnancy test in her trembling hands, the result was the same: one single, unyielding pink line. She would cry in the bathroom, wipe away her tears, and force herself to smile when Andrew came home. But she could feel it, the distance growing between them like a creeping vine, tightening its grip. Andrew, once patient and supportive, started staying late at work more often. His once reassuring words became curt responses. His gentle touch became rare. The moments that used to be filled with laughter were now filled with silence. One night, as they lay in bed, Emily reached for his hand. "We're going to be okay, right?" she whispered. He hesitated before squeezing her fingers lightly. "Of course," he murmured. But even in the dark, she could tell that he wasn't convinced. A love fading away. As time went on, Emily threw herself into finding solutions. She read endless articles, joined support groups, and clung to every sliver of hope she could find. She tried everything: herbal teas, acupuncture, special diets, but nothing worked. Meanwhile, Andrew seemed to detach further. He stopped coming home for dinner, stopped asking about her doctor's appointments, stopped holding her at night. One evening, she prepared his favorite meal: rosemary chicken with mashed potatoes, hoping that it would rekindle some warmth between them. She set the table with candles, played soft music, and waited, and waited, and waited. By the time he walked in past midnight, she was sitting alone at the table, her untouched meal cold. "Where were you?" she asked, her voice quiet but firm. Andrew sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Work ran late." "Again?" "Yeah." She studied him. His shirt was slightly wrinkled, the top buttons undone, and the scent of perfume, not hers, lingered in the air. Her stomach twisted, but she said nothing. She wanted to believe him. She needed to believe him. That night, as she lay awake staring at the ceiling, she told herself that she was overthinking things, that he was just stressed, that marriages went through rough patches. She had to believe that. Because if she didn't, what else did she have? The decision to surprise him. One morning, Emily sat on the edge of the bathtub, another negative test clutched in her shaking hands. The weight of disappointment settled in her chest like a stone. She had a doctor's appointment that afternoon, another consultation, another round of tests, and she wanted Andrew to be there. They had started this journey together. They were supposed to go through it together. She called his phone. No answer. She texted. No response. A strange feeling crept into her bones. She checked the time. He was supposed to be at the office. Maybe he was in a meeting. Maybe he was busy. Or maybe something was wrong. An idea formed in her mind. She would go to his office. Surprise him. Remind him that they were in this together. Maybe if they could just talk, they could find their way back to each other. Grabbing her coat, she hurried out the door. The moment that changed everything. Emily arrived at Andrew's office just after noon. The receptionist, a young woman with perfectly manicured nails, looked up from her desk. "Hi, I'm here to see Andrew Dawson," Emily said with a polite smile. The receptionist hesitated for a split second, just long enough for unease to creep up Emily's spine, before she nodded. "Oh, sure, his office is just down the hall." Something felt off. Emily walked down the hallway, her heels clicking against the polished floor. As she reached his door, she hesitated. She could hear voices, laughter, a woman's voice, warm and flirtatious. Her heart pounded. Without thinking, she pushed the door open. And then, her world shattered. Andrew was inside, but he wasn't alone. He was sitting on his desk, his shirt unbuttoned, his tie loosened. And in his arms was another woman. A blonde, dressed in a tight pencil skirt, her hands on his chest. Emily's breath caught in her throat. For a moment, no one moved. Then Andrew turned, his expression shifting from surprise to something else. Annoyance. Emily's hands trembled. Her mind screamed at her to speak, to shout, to demand answers. But all she could do was stare. The woman scrambled away, fixing her skirt. Andrew let out a long sigh, rubbing his temples as if she was the inconvenience in this situation. "You shouldn't have come here, Emily," he said, his voice flat. Her world tilted, her vision blurred. And then he spoke the words that destroyed her completely. "This isn't working anymore. We both know it." A sharp, piercing pain shot through her chest. He wasn't sorry. He wasn't ashamed. He was done. Just like that. Emily's throat tightened. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. She had spent years fighting for their love, fighting to save their family, fighting to fix what she thought was broken. But now she realized the truth. It wasn't broken. It was never whole to begin with. And as she stood there, in the ruins of everything she had built, she knew one thing for certain. She was done fighting for someone who had already let go. Without another word, she turned around and walked away. Away from Andrew. Away from the life she thought she had. And for the first time in years, she had no idea where she was going. But one thing was certain, she wasn't going back. The road to nowhere. The walk away. Emily's legs carried her out of Andrew's office on autopilot. Her vision blurred with unshed tears, her breath shallow and erratic. The world outside the office building seemed too bright, too loud, too real. She had walked into that office hoping to bring her husband back to her. And instead, she had walked out knowing that she had never truly had him to begin with. The city streets buzzed around her, but Emily barely registered the sound of honking horns and hurried footsteps. Her heart pounded, her stomach twisted, and her mind raced through every moment of the past few years. Every lie, every excuse, every late-night meeting that suddenly made perfect sense. Her fingers trembled as she pulled her phone from her pocket. She could call someone. Anyone. But who? Her parents? No. Her mother had always been wary of Andrew. And Emily wasn't ready for the inevitable, "I told you so." A friend? Maybe. But what could they say that would fix the shattered mess inside of her? Her eyes landed on Andrew's name in her contacts. A sick part of her wanted to call him, to demand an explanation, to scream at him for what he had done. But deep down, she knew the truth. No explanation would change what she saw. Instead, she did something she never thought she would. She blocked his number. She didn't know where she was going, only that she couldn't go home, not to the house where his scent still lingered, where their wedding pictures hung on the walls, where she had spent nights dreaming of a future that was never real. So she just drove, returning to the past. Somehow, without thinking, Emily found herself pulling up to a house she hadn't visited in years, her childhood home. A small white house with blue shutters stood in the middle of a quiet suburban neighborhood, just as it had when she was a little girl. The sight of it sent a lump to her throat. She sat in her car for a long moment, gripping the steering wheel, wondering if she had made a mistake coming here. But before she could decide, the front door swung open, and a familiar face stepped onto the porch. Her mother. Margaret Dawson was a strong woman, silver-haired, kind-eyed, with the same no-nonsense expression she had worn when Emily was a teenager sneaking past curfew. But today, her face softened the moment she saw her daughter. Emily didn't need to say anything. Her mother took one look at her face, at the red-rimmed eyes, the slight shake in her hands, and she knew. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered, stepping forward. Emily barely made it up the porch steps before she broke. Margaret caught her, wrapping her in the same comforting embrace she had since she was a child. Emily clung to her, burying her face in her mother's shoulder, and for the first time since stepping into that office, she sobbed. She cried for the years she had wasted. She cried for the love she had given so freely, only to have it thrown away. She cried for the woman she used to be, the one who believed in fairy tales, in forever, in Andrew. Her mother held her through it all, whispering words of comfort, rocking her as if she were still that little girl with scraped knees and a broken heart over some childhood disappointment. But this heartbreak was so much bigger. Picking up the pieces. That night, Emily lay awake in her childhood bedroom, staring at the ceiling. Everything felt surreal. The walls were still painted the soft lavender color she had chosen at 16. The bookshelves were lined with old novels, the ones she used to get lost in before she fell in love with Andrew and started getting lost in him instead. The past felt so close here, so tangible, like she had stepped back in time, before her heart had ever been broken, before she had known the sting of betrayal. But she wasn't 16 anymore. She wasn't naive. She was a woman who had been shattered, and she had no idea how to put herself back together. A soft knock on the door pulled her from her thoughts. "Come in," she called softly. Her mother stepped inside, carrying a cup of tea. She set it on the nightstand and sat on the edge of the bed. Margaret studied her daughter carefully. "Do you want to talk about it?" Emily let out a slow, shaky breath. "I caught him with someone else." Her mother's lips pressed into a thin line. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart." Emily swallowed the lump in her throat. I don't understand how he could do this. After everything we've been through. After everything I gave up for him." Margaret reached over, tucking a strand of Emily's hair behind her ear like she used to when she was little. "Some people, no matter how much love you give them, will always be looking for something more." Emily's eyes stung. "I feel so stupid." "You're not stupid." Her mother's voice was firm. "You loved him. You believed in him. That's not stupid. That's brave." Emily let out a humorless laugh. "It doesn't feel brave." Margaret squeezed her hand. "You walked away. That's the bravest thing you could have done." But was it? Because right now, it didn't feel like she had walked away. It felt like she had been forced away, discarded like something worthless. A silence settled between them before Margaret finally asked, "So, what now?" That was the question, wasn't it? What now? For so long, every step Emily had taken was with Andrew. Every decision, every dream, every plan, all of it had revolved around him. Now, she had nothing. "I don't know," she admitted quietly. Her mother nodded, as if she had expected that answer. "That's okay. You don't have to know right now." Emily wished she could believe that. But right now, all she felt was lost. The unexpected visitor. The next morning, Emily was sitting on the front porch, wrapped in an old blanket, sipping coffee, when a car pulled up in the driveway. At first, she tensed, panic flaring in her chest. Andrew. But then, the driver stepped out, and Emily's breath caught. Alex Carter. Alex had been her best friend once, long before Andrew, long before heartbreak, long before she had turned into the woman sitting on this porch, feeling like she had lost everything. He had been the boy who walked her home from school, who defended her against bullies, who made her laugh when no one else could. And then, life had happened. They had grown up, drifted apart. But now, here he was, standing in her driveway, hands in his pockets, looking at her with that same steady gaze she had always known. "Hey, stranger," he said. Emily blinked, completely caught off guard. "Alex, what are you doing here?" He gave her a small smile. "I heard you were back in town. Figured you could use a friend." A lump formed in Emily's throat, because for the first time in days, maybe years, she realized something. She wasn't alone. And maybe, just maybe, that changed everything. A new beginning, or the same old mistakes. The ghosts of yesterday. Emily wasn't sure what was more shocking, seeing Alex Carter after all these years, or the fact that he was standing in her mother's driveway, looking at her like he still knew exactly who she was. For a long moment, she just stared at him, her brain trying to process the sudden shift in reality. She had spent the past 24 hours drowning in the pain of Andrew's betrayal, convinced that everything she had built was gone. And yet here was someone from before Andrew, before the heartbreak, before she had lost herself in the dream of a perfect marriage. Alex Carter was a reminder of who she used to be. And maybe that was exactly what she needed. "You gonna let me in, or just keep staring?" His voice pulled her from her thoughts, teasing but gentle. Emily blinked and managed a small, shaky smile. "I don't know. Depends. Are you here to tell me my life's a mess?" Alex let out a soft chuckle, his brown eyes warm. "I think you already know that." A short laugh escaped her, unexpected but real. The first real laugh in days. She stepped aside, motioning for him to come inside. "Well, if you're here to witness my midlife crisis at 30, come on in." Alex followed her inside, and as soon as the door closed behind them, a strange sensation settled in Emily's chest. Comfort. It had been years since she had last seen Alex, yet something about his presence felt right. Familiar. Safe. They settled into the living room, where the scent of her mother's vanilla candles mixed with the faint aroma of fresh coffee. Alex leaned back in the old armchair across from her, looking around the room as if stepping into a time capsule. "Not much has changed," he mused. Emily shrugged, curling up on the couch with her mug. "Guess some things stay the same." He met her gaze, his expression unreadable. "Not everything." She swallowed, knowing exactly what he meant. They weren't kids anymore. She wasn't the girl who used to dream about fairy tales. And she definitely wasn't the same girl who had once wondered if she and Alex were meant to be something more. Because back then, they had been inseparable. Best friends. And maybe something that almost became more if Andrew hadn't come along first. But there was no point thinking about the past. Not when her present was already crumbling beneath her feet. Unfinished business. "So," Alex finally said, breaking the silence, "are you gonna tell me what happened, or do I have to guess?" Emily sighed, rubbing her temples. "It's a long story. I got time." She hesitated. Did she really want to unload everything onto him? Did she want to say the words out loud? Make it real? But then again, what did she have to lose? So she told him. Everything. She told him about the years of waiting, hoping, praying for a child. The endless doctor visits, the late-night disappointments, the way Andrew had slowly but surely pulled away from her. She told him about the empty words, the late nights, the cold stares that she tried to ignore. And then she told him about the office, about walking in and finding Andrew with someone else. By the time she finished, her hands were gripping her coffee cup so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Alex was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he exhaled sharply. Son of a asterisk asterisk asterisk. Emily let out a humorless laugh. Yeah, that about sums it up. Alex leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. So what now? That was the million-dollar question, wasn't it? What now? She had no home, no marriage, no plan. Only the raw, aching certainty that she could never go back to the way things were. I don't know, she admitted. I guess I just start over. Alex nodded, his gaze steady. Then let's figure out what that looks like. More than just a friend. The next few days passed in a blur. Emily spent time with her mother, trying to regain a sense of normalcy. But more than anything, she spent time with Alex. At first, it was small things, morning coffee on the porch, aimless drives through town, reminiscing about the past. But then something started shifting between them. Something unspoken. One evening, as they sat by the lake where they used to spend their summers, Alex glanced at her, his expression serious. You know, I never understood why you married him. Emily's breath caught. What? He shrugged, skipping a stone across the water. I mean, I get it now. You wanted the life you always dreamed of. But back then, I didn't get it. One day we were best friends, and the next, you were with him. A lump formed in her throat. Alex, he turned to her, his gaze intense. Did you ever wonder if things could have been different? Her heart pounded. Did she? Yes. 1,000,000 times. There had been a moment, before Andrew, before everything, when she had looked at Alex and wondered if he was supposed to be her forever. But she had been too afraid to ruin their friendship. So instead, she had walked into a different future, one that had just fallen apart. She opened her mouth, but the words caught in her throat. Alex studied her for a moment longer before shaking his head with a soft chuckle. Forget it. Bad timing. Emily exhaled shakily. Yeah, something like that. But even as she said it, a small part of her whispered, was it really? The test that changed everything. The next morning, Emily woke up feeling off. At first, she thought it was just the stress, the emotional whiplash of the past week catching up to her, but then the nausea hit hard. By midday, she was sitting on the bathroom floor, pale and shaking. Her mother knocked on the door. Sweetheart, I'm fine, she lied. But she wasn't, because suddenly a terrifying thought took root in her mind. No, it wasn't possible. It couldn't be possible. Except, the realization made her stomach drop. Her cycle was late, really late. A cold sweat broke out over her skin as she forced herself to her feet. She knew she had to do it, even if she didn't want to. 15 minutes later, she stared down at the small plastic test in her trembling hands. And the second she saw the result, her entire world shifted again. 2 pink lines. Emily's breath caught in her throat. She was pregnant. After all the years of waiting, after all the heartbreak, after finally walking away from Andrew, she was pregnant. And suddenly, the future she thought she was rebuilding just became even more complicated. A life in the balance. The weight of 2 pink lines. Emily's hands trembled as she gripped the pregnancy test, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The 2 pink lines stared back at her, solid and undeniable, like a verdict she hadn't been prepared for. Her mind raced. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not now. Not like this. For 4 years, she had prayed for this moment. She had begged, cried, and suffered through countless disappointments. She had watched her marriage crumble under the weight of infertility. And now, when she had finally walked away from the man who had broken her, life had handed her this. Her stomach twisted. This wasn't a blessing. This was a trap. A cruel twist of fate designed to drag her back into the nightmare she had just escaped. A knock on the bathroom door jolted her back to reality. Emily. Her mother's voice was gentle, concerned. Are you all right? Sweetheart. Emily swallowed hard, gripping the edge of the sink as she tried to steady herself. No, she wasn't all right. She was terrified. I'm fine, Mom, she called back, forcing her voice to stay even. I'll be out in a minute. She heard her mother hesitate before footsteps retreated down the hall. Emily exhaled shakily, turning back to the test in her hands. She needed time. Time to think. Time to figure out what the hell she was going to do next. A truth too big to hide. But time wasn't a luxury she had. That afternoon, as she sat at the kitchen table, absently stirring a cup of tea, Margaret finally asked the question she had been waiting for. Are you going to tell me what's going on? Emily hesitated, staring down at the tea leaves swirling in her cup. She could lie. She could pretend everything was fine. But the truth was too big to swallow. She took a deep breath. I'm pregnant. Her mother's eyes widened, her expression unreadable. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, oh, Emily. Emily braced herself, waiting for the judgment, the disappointment, the inevitable questions. But they didn't come. Instead, Margaret reached across the table, taking her daughter's hands in her own. What do you need? She asked simply. Emily's throat tightened. Because she didn't know. She had spent so long chasing this dream, fighting for a child that never came. Now that it was real, she had no idea what to do. Did she keep it? Could she raise a child alone? Would Andrew fight her for custody? A cold shiver ran down her spine. She knew one thing for certain. Andrew could never find out. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Margaret squeezed her hand. You don't have to figure everything out today, sweetheart. Just breathe. Breathe. Emily nodded numbly, but the truth was, she didn't know how to breathe anymore, because this wasn't just her life anymore. There was someone else to think about now. Someone she had never met. Someone who needed her to get this right. The man who deserved to know. Emily wasn't sure why she did it. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was the fact that there was only one person in the world who made her feel like she wasn't drowning. But that evening, she found herself knocking on Alex Carter's door. It was late, the night air cool against her skin as she stood outside his small, two-story house on the edge of town. She didn't even know if he was home. But when the door swung open and Alex appeared, everything inside her settled. His expression shifted the moment he saw her. Emily, what's wrong? She let out a shaky breath. Can we talk? Alex nodded instantly. Of course. Come in. She stepped inside, wrapping her arms around herself as she tried to find the words. How did she even say this? How did she tell the one person who had been there for her that she was carrying another man's child? They sat on the couch, and Alex waited, patient as ever, watching her with that quiet intensity that had always unnerved her. Finally, she just said it. I'm pregnant. His eyes widened, but he didn't speak. He just stared. Emily felt the panic rise in her throat. I know this isn't what you expected, and I don't even know why I came here, but Hey. His voice was soft, steady. She stopped rambling. Alex exhaled slowly, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. It's Andrew's, isn't it? Emily swallowed hard. Yeah. Silence stretched between them. Then, does he know? She shook her head. Alex studied her for a long moment. And you don't want him to. Emily hesitated. I don't know yet. Because the second Andrew knew, everything would change. She could handle him walking away from their marriage. But this child would be leverage to him, a way to control her. And that terrified her more than anything. Alex nodded, his jaw tightening. All right. She blinked. All right. He shrugged. If you don't want him to know, then he won't. Emily stared at him. You're not going to tell me I should go back to him? That I should fight for my marriage now that I'm pregnant? Alex's eyes darkened. You don't owe him anything, Em. He made his choice. Her breath caught. Because that was it, wasn't it? Andrew had already chosen to betray her. This baby didn't change that. Tears stung her eyes. I don't know if I can do this alone. Alex reached for her hand, squeezing gently. You're not alone. And somehow, for the first time since seeing those two pink lines, Emily almost believed him. The storm before the war. But peace was short-lived, because 2 days later, Andrew found out. Emily wasn't sure how he did it. Maybe he had been tracking her. Maybe someone had slipped up. Maybe it was just bad luck. But when she walked out of the grocery store that afternoon, she froze, because Andrew was standing beside her car, waiting. His suit was pristine, his expression calm, too calm. Emily's heart pounded. She took a slow breath, forcing herself to stand tall. What do you want? His lips curled into something resembling a smile. We need to talk. She tightened her grip on her grocery bags. I have nothing to say to you. Andrew's eyes flickered. I know, Emily. Her stomach turned. Know what? He stepped closer, voice dropping to a whisper. I know you're pregnant. Her entire body went cold. Andrew smirked. And we both know what that means. She shook her head, stepping back. No, you don't get to. You think you can keep my child from me. He let out a soft chuckle, shaking his head. Oh, Emily, you don't understand. His voice lowered, dangerous. This isn't over. And in that moment, standing under the harsh afternoon sun, Emily realized. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was war. The battle for tomorrow. A game of shadows. Emily felt like she had been plunged into an icy lake, her entire body numb from Andrew's chilling words. He stood in front of her, calm and composed, as if nothing had changed, as if his betrayal had been nothing more than a casual mistake, easily forgiven. You don't get to threaten me, she said, voice trembling despite her attempt at strength. You made your choice the day you chose her over our marriage. Andrew's gaze hardened slightly, a flicker of annoyance passing across his features before quickly vanishing. He tilted his head, the familiar look of superiority creeping into his expression. I admit, mistakes were made, Emily. But that doesn't change the fact that you're carrying my child. Emily's jaw clenched. You don't care about this child. You care about controlling me. You always have. His eyes narrowed slightly. Think what you want. But legally, I have rights. Rights? Emily scoffed, her voice rising despite her best efforts. You lost those rights the moment you threw away our marriage. Andrew stepped closer, his voice dangerously quiet. We'll see about that. Emily took a deep breath, steadying herself. She wouldn't show fear. Not here. Not now. Stay away from me, Andrew, she warned firmly. If you have anything to say, talk to my lawyer. Without waiting for a reply, Emily turned her back on him and walked away, every muscle in her body aching with tension. She forced herself not to look back, even as she felt his cold gaze burning into her. He wasn't going to stop. She knew that. But neither would she. Allies in the dark. Emily drove straight to Rachel Turner's office, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles whitened. She was done being afraid, done letting Andrew dictate the terms of her life. Rachel greeted her with concern, immediately sensing something was wrong. Emily? What happened? He knows, Emily said bluntly, sinking into the chair across from Rachel's desk. He knows about the pregnancy, and he's threatening me. Rachel's expression tightened. She reached into her drawer, pulling out a legal pad, immediately shifting into battle mode. Tell me exactly what he said. Emily recounted the confrontation, each word weighing heavily on her. Rachel's pen moved swiftly, capturing every detail. When she finished, Rachel looked up, her gaze fierce. He's trying to intimidate you into backing down, Emily. He thinks if he frightens you enough, you'll return to him. That's never going to happen, Emily said firmly. Good, Rachel replied, her voice strong. Because it's time we get ahead of this. If Andrew files for custody, he could drag this divorce out indefinitely. You need to protect yourself and your child. Now. Emily exhaled sharply. Tell me what I need to do. Rachel's eyes met hers, unwavering. We file first. For sole custody. We prove that Andrew's infidelity and emotional manipulation created an unsafe environment for you, and would do the same for your child. Emily nodded slowly, determination replacing fear. Then let's do it. Rachel's expression softened slightly, admiration flickering in her eyes. You're stronger than he thinks, Emily. Remember that. She would. An unexpected guardian. Emily returned home later that evening, emotionally drained but resolute. As she stepped onto the porch, she noticed Alex's car parked outside. Her heartbeat quickened slightly. He was waiting for her, leaning against the railing, watching her approach. You okay? He asked softly, noticing the tension etched into her features. She hesitated for a moment, the weight of the day pressing down on her. Andrew knows about the baby. Alex's jaw tightened, a flash of anger in his eyes. Did he hurt you? Emily shook her head quickly. Not physically, but he's threatening me. He wants control, Alex. He always has. Alex exhaled, stepping closer. Then he'll have to get through me first. Her chest tightened. Alex, you don't have to. He held up a hand, gently stopping her. I know I don't have to, but I want to. She searched his face, trying to understand. Why? He took a slow, careful breath, as if gathering the courage for something he'd long held back. Because seeing you hurt is something I've never been able to bear. Even when we were kids, I hated it. And now it feels even worse. Emily, He hesitated, as if the words were caught in his throat. Her heart pounded. Alex, what are you trying to say? He looked down briefly before meeting her eyes again, determination settling in his expression. I've always loved you, Em, even when I pretended I didn't. Even when you chose him. I thought it was something I'd get over, but I never did. Emily stood speechless, breathless, the world suddenly shifting again beneath her feet. Alex, her voice broke softly. He stepped back slightly, giving her space. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know you're not alone. Not ever. Emily felt tears stinging her eyes, overwhelmed by a rush of emotions. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. He smiled gently, warmth in his gaze. Just know I'm here. Storm clouds gathered. Days turned into weeks, and Emily felt herself gradually regaining control of her life. Rachel had filed the custody petition, and Andrew had responded with predictable aggression, fighting back with legal maneuvers designed to intimidate. Emily refused to back down. Every threat, every manipulation only strengthened her resolve. She would fight for her child. She would fight for her freedom. She would fight for herself. But the constant battle wore her down. Sleep became scarce, her appetite non-existent. Margaret watched her carefully, worry evident in every glance. Sweetheart, you need rest, her mother pleaded one evening. This stress isn't good for you or the baby. I know, Mom. Emily sighed deeply, exhaustion heavy in her bones. But if I let down my guard for even a second, Andrew will take advantage. Margaret gently touched her daughter's shoulder. You're stronger than he is. He knows it. That's why he's fighting so hard. Emily hoped her mother was right, because deep down, she felt the edge of her strength wearing thin. A dangerous encounter. One evening, while walking alone through the park near her mother's home, Emily sensed something was wrong. The air felt heavy, the shadows deeper than usual. She quickened her pace, glancing over her shoulder. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the darkness ahead. Andrew. Emily stopped, heart hammering, fear clawing at her throat. What are you doing here? You're making this harder than it needs to be, Andrew said, stepping forward. His voice was cold, emotionless. Leave me alone, Emily snapped, fighting panic. I just want to talk, he insisted, moving closer, ignoring the fear in her eyes. Stay away from me. Emily raised her voice, glancing around desperately, but the park was empty. Andrew grabbed her arm, his grip tight. Emily, stop this. You need me. Fear surged through her veins. Let go. A sudden shout broke the darkness. Get your hands off her. Andrew spun around, startled. Alex was running towards them, fury burning in his eyes. Before Andrew could react, Alex shoved him away, standing protectively in front of Emily. You ever touch her again, I'll make sure you regret it. Alex growled, his voice dangerously calm. Andrew glared, calculating his next move before finally stepping back, coldly smiling at Emily. This isn't over. Alex stood firm, his body tense, shielding Emily until Andrew finally disappeared into the shadows. When he turned to face her, concern filled his eyes. Are you okay? Emily nodded shakily, adrenaline fading, replaced by relief and gratitude. Without thinking, she reached out, wrapping her arms around Alex, holding him tightly. Thank you, she whispered, her voice trembling. He held her close, strong, and steady. Always. And in that moment, Emily knew one thing for certain. No matter how hard Andrew tried to tear her down, she would never be alone again. Because now, she had something worth fighting for, and someone worth fighting beside. Rising from the ashes, the calm before the final storm. The days following the confrontation in the park were filled with tension, an uneasy quiet settling over Emily's life, like the oppressive stillness before a hurricane. Andrew's silence felt deliberate, calculated. Emily knew better than to think he had surrendered. He was preparing for something, planning his next strike, and she couldn't afford to be caught unprepared. Yet, despite the looming threat, Emily felt stronger than she had in years. Alex's presence in her life had become more constant, a steady, reassuring force that she had grown to rely on. Their friendship had deepened, woven together by shared pain and renewed hope. But there was something more there now, something deeper, unspoken yet undeniable. One evening, as they sat together on the porch watching the sunset spill shades of gold across the horizon, Emily finally broke the silence that had lingered between them. Alex, she started softly, her heart pounding with nerves. About what you said the other day. He turned to her, his expression cautious yet hopeful. You mean? She took a deep breath, meeting his eyes. About always loving me. He nodded slowly, watching her intently. I need you to know, she whispered, her voice trembling slightly, that your words meant everything. But I'm terrified. After everything I've been through, trusting anyone again feels almost impossible. Alex reached for her hand gently, his grip warm, comforting. I get it. You don't owe me anything, Emily. My feelings won't change, whether you're ready now or years from now. I just need you to know you're loved, truly loved, for exactly who you are. His sincerity struck her deeply, warming the parts of her heart that had felt frozen since Andrew's betrayal. Slowly, she allowed herself to lean into him, resting her head against his shoulder. Thank you, she whispered, finally feeling safe enough to breathe. The courtroom battle. The courtroom felt cold, clinical, an arena prepared for battle rather than justice. Emily sat beside Rachel, her heart hammering against her chest as Andrew took his seat opposite them. He looked confident, composed, as if he were attending a business meeting rather than fighting over the fate of their unborn child. Stay calm, Rachel whispered firmly. He wants to provoke you. Don't give him the satisfaction. Emily nodded, taking deep, steady breaths, trying to silence the anxious voices in her head. The judge began proceedings, his voice authoritative. We are here to finalize the divorce proceedings and address the matter of custody for the unborn child. Counsel, your opening statements. Andrew's attorney spoke first, painting Emily as emotional, unstable, and unfit. Each accusation designed to sting, to chip away at her confidence. But Rachel was unshaken. She stood, her voice strong and clear as she presented the truth. Your Honor, my client has endured years of emotional manipulation and betrayal. Andrew Dawson's actions directly endangered her emotional well-being and continue to pose a threat to her safety and that of their unborn child. We ask the court to grant full custody to Emily Dawson, free of interference. Witnesses came and went, some friends, some coworkers, all painting contrasting pictures of Emily and Andrew's marriage. But as Emily took the stand, she felt the weight of the moment pressing on her. Mrs. Dawson, Rachel began gently, can you describe your marriage to Andrew? Emily took a shaky breath, then began speaking, her voice steady, the truth finally finding its way out. She spoke openly, unflinchingly, detailing Andrew's infidelity, manipulation, and threats. She spoke about her years of loneliness, her struggle with infertility, and the crushing heartbreak when she had discovered Andrew's betrayal. Finally, Rachel asked the crucial question. Do you believe Andrew Dawson is fit to be involved in your child's life? Emily looked directly at Andrew, her voice clear and unwavering. No, I believe Andrew cares only about control. He doesn't know how to love, not genuinely. Our child deserves better than to be another pawn in his game. A heavy silence filled the room, her words resonating deeply. Justice delivered. After hours of tense deliberation, the judge returned with his verdict. Emily's heart pounded, each second stretching endlessly. After careful consideration of the evidence and testimonies provided, it is this court's determination that full custody be awarded to Emily Dawson, with supervised visitation rights granted to Andrew Dawson upon the child's birth, pending further evaluations. Additionally, the divorce is hereby finalized. Emily's breath caught in her throat, relief washing over her like a tidal wave. Andrew's composure finally cracked, his expression shifting from confidence to anger and disbelief. He rose abruptly, ignoring his lawyer's quiet instructions to remain calm. Your Honor, you can't be serious. Sit down, Mr. Dawson, the judge warned sternly, shutting down any protest. My decision is final. Emily felt tears sting her eyes as the gavel struck down, echoing with a sense of finality she had longed for. It was finally over. As she left the courtroom, her mother and Alex were waiting. Margaret pulled her into a warm embrace, holding her daughter tightly. I'm so proud of you, sweetheart. When Margaret stepped back, Alex stood quietly, his eyes filled with relief and admiration. Without hesitation, Emily moved toward him, letting herself be enveloped in his protective embrace. You did it, he whispered softly into her hair. We did it, she corrected gently, holding onto him as if he were her lifeline. The promise of tomorrow. Months passed, bringing healing and growth in equal measure. Emily had rebuilt her life slowly but surely, embracing each new day with a renewed sense of hope and strength. She had transformed her childhood home into her own sanctuary, ready for the life she would soon welcome. And finally, on a crisp spring morning, Emily held her newborn daughter for the first time, the tiny bundle warm and fragile in her arms. Her heart expanded with overwhelming love, a fierce protectiveness settling deep within her. Alex stood beside her hospital bed, his eyes filled with awe and affection as he gazed at the baby. He had remained at Emily's side throughout the pregnancy, unwavering in his support and affection. What are you naming her? He asked softly. Emily smiled, looking down into her daughter's beautiful face. Hope, she whispered, tears of joy trickling down her cheeks. Her name is Hope. Alex gently placed his hand on Emily's shoulder, his voice warm and tender. It suits her. Emily glanced up, meeting his gaze. Thank you for everything. I couldn't have survived without you. You're stronger than you realize, Alex replied, sincerity shining in his eyes. You always were. Her heart fluttered, peace settling over her. Maybe, but you helped me remember it. He leaned forward, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. Always. A new chapter. 1 year later, beneath a clear summer sky, Emily stood in the backyard, Hope giggling happily as she toddled across the grass. Alex was chasing her playfully, laughter filling the air, a sound Emily had once feared she might never hear. Margaret watched fondly from the porch, smiling softly at the scene before her. Catching her mother's eye, Emily felt gratitude fill her heart, knowing the darkness she had endured had led her here. She had once chased the illusion of a perfect family with Andrew, sacrificing herself in the process. Now she finally understood the truth. Real love didn't demand perfection. It simply offered acceptance, kindness, and strength. As Alex lifted Hope into his arms, the toddler shrieking with delight, he turned toward Emily, warmth and adoration evident in his smile. She moved to join them, slipping an arm around Alex's waist, feeling utterly complete. This was her family. Imperfect, beautiful, and real. Life had knocked her down, tried to break her, and yet, here she stood, stronger and happier than she had ever imagined possible. She glanced at Alex, whose eyes sparkled with love, then down at Hope, whose laughter filled her heart with joy. This was her new beginning. And this time, Emily knew without a doubt, she had finally found the love she truly deserved.